Welcome to the Mind Cut series. Today, we're diving deep into some really fundamental aspects of life, things like relationships, personal growth, what actually drives our behavior. We're
Yeah.
using this really fascinating conversation you shared as our starting point.
Yeah, and our mission really is to unpack the core science behind it all and see how it, connects directly to you, the listener.
Exactly. So, what are we actually covering today?
Well, we'll be dissecting the neurochemistry, like the step-by-step of falling in love. We'll explore the tricky bits of long-term relationships, the crucial role of friendship in that,
Okay.
and we'll look at how modern stuff like dating apps, maybe even pornography, might be influencing things.
Nope. And practical strategies, too.
Definitely. Getting into how to handle anxiety, other big emotions, how society subtly shapes attraction, and really why knowing your self-awareness is so key for navigating, well, everything life throws at you.
Sounds good. And the material itself, it's quite a mix, isn't it?
It is. It draws from, the hard science of relationships, some evolutionary psychology, behavioral science too, and even some really telling personal stories about how people act in dating or at work, you name it.
So the goal for listeners for this deep dive.
It's really about moving past just theory. We want to give you actionable takeaways, whether you're figuring out relationships, dealing with anxiety, or just plain curious about why we do what we do. We want this to be useful, something you can actually apply.
Okay, let's dive in. The conversation we're looking at today started by highlighting three traits, powerful drivers for success, they called them.
Yeah, three things. First, meticulous attention to detail. Second, a really strong capacity for delayed gratification. They also called it an unusual capacity for suffering, which is interesting.
A striking phrase. And the third,
Consistency.
yeah.
Just sticking with it. The idea was that these aren't just like nice personality quirks. They're fundamental for getting through challenges and reaching those big long-term goals.
Makes sense. And then it got into something quite counterintuitive, didn't it, about happiness?
It really did. This paradox of happiness and meaning. The conversation suggested that if your only goal is to, get rid of unhappiness, you might actually block yourself from finding real happiness.
How so?
Well, the idea is that a truly meaningful life often involves accepting, maybe even being grateful for, the unavoidable struggles and discomfort. Like training for a marathon, the pain is part of what makes crossing the finish line feel so amazing.
Right. You don't get the reward without the effort, the struggle. The source materials even mentioned how maybe the therapy world sometimes implies that any suffering means something's broken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the message here seems to be embracing the difficulty inherent in pursuing worthwhile things. That's actually a path towards success and, a deeper kind of happiness, not just avoiding pain.
Okay, that ties into the next point, too, about learning, right? Academia versus the real world.
Yeah, it touched on that disconnect,
Yeah.
especially in business, how sometimes purely academic theories can feel, well, a bit removed when you're actually trying to run something.
I can imagine, like reading about strategy versus actually making payroll.
Precisely. So the value of case studies and really applying theories to your own life, your own projects, that was really emphasized.
Someone in the source even said some academic ideas felt irrelevant in their business. But then the flip side was also important.
Right, the huge value in bringing scientific understanding into our personal lives. Viewing your life as a startup where happiness and love are the currencies you're aiming for. I thought that was a neat analogy.
Me too. And speaking of applying science to personal life, that led straight into the neurochemistry of falling in love. A cascade, they called it. 5 stages. Or was it 4?
Yeah, sometimes described as 5, sometimes 4. Let's break it down. Stage 1, ignition.
Okay, the spark.
Exactly. All about initial attraction. Hormones are key here. Estrogen, estradiol, testosterone. And interestingly, testosterone in both men and women plays a role.
So it's not just a male hormone in this context.
Not at all. And this biological push is why, even people who say they aren't superficial still care about looking good, making that good impression. It's partly hardwired.
Okay, so hormones ignite things. What's next?
Stage 2 involves neurotransmitters. Norepinephrine kicks in, that's the euphoria, the buzz. And dopamine, that's the big one for anticipation, craving, wanting more.
Ah, the dopamine hit, like waiting for that text message.
Exactly, that obsessive excitement, checking your phone constantly. Pure dopamine, anticipating the reward of connection.
Okay, so euphoria and anticipation. Then stage 3 gets, interesting, a drop in something.
Yeah, serotonin. Levels decrease. Now, low serotonin is linked to clinical depression, which sounds bad, but here,
It serves a purpose.
it seems so.
Fine.
Falling in love, This drop is thought to fuel that intense focus, almost obsessive thinking about the other person. You just can't get them out of your head.
And that constant thinking actually strengthens the bond.
Paradoxically, yes, it drives bonding. It's also linked, apparently, to artistic temperaments, that kind of intense, all-consuming focus. And it can fuel jealousy and maybe even surveillance behavior sometimes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It also raises a question about medication, doesn't it? Like SSRIs?
A really important point the conversation touched on. SSRIs work by increasing serotonin. So anecdotally, some people on them report finding it harder to fall deeply in love, maybe because that natural serotonin dip is suppressed.
Something to consider. Okay, so after the serotonin dip, where do we go?
Stage 4, pair bonding. This is where long-term attachment forms. The key players here are oxytocin and vasopressin.
The cuddle hormones?
You could call them that. They create that deep sense of connection, making your partner feel almost like family, like kin. Things like direct eye contact, physical touch, they release oxytocin.
Like that intense feeling parents get seeing their newborn.
Exactly. A huge oxytocin surge. It's powerful stuff for bonding.
So if we zoom out, what's the ultimate goal of all this, according to the source?
The goal in a long-term relationship is reaching what's called companionate love. Now, this doesn't mean passion dies, but the foundation becomes deep friendship, respect, shared life.
So the best friend idea, how does the friend zone fit in here?
Yes. The thinking presented was, if you skip those initial intense neurochemical stages, the attraction, the dopamine rush, the serotonin dip, and you just start out as friends.
You might miss the biological glue.
Kind of, yeah. You might miss the specific processes that forge that deeper, romantic, committed bond. So while ending up as best friends is the ideal, starting as just friends might not trigger the same cascade.
That's a really interesting perspective on the friend zone. Okay, this leads nicely into the critique of modern dating, particularly apps.
Right. The concern raised was that these apps might, maybe inadvertently, mess with this natural progression. How? By encouraging quick judgments based on profiles.
Swipe left, swipe right, often based on superficial stuff.
Exactly. And maybe by leading us to look for people who are just like us, who mirror our tastes instead of someone complementary.
But doesn't science suggest attraction is often about complementarity? Even like immune system differences.
Precisely. That's the MHC major histocompatibility complex idea. We might be subconsciously drawn to immunological difference. The conversation even mentioned kissing as potentially a way of subconsciously sampling saliva, checking that compatibility. Dating apps don't really account for that.
So apps might be pushing us towards mirrors, not complements. Okay, so practically speaking, how do we manage this intense love cascade? Can we even control it?
Well, we can't fully control who we fall for, obviously. But understanding the biology, that gives us power to manage our behavior.
Like knowing what's happening when you feel crazy jealous.
Exactly. The term emoilia came up, falling in love too fast, too hard. The key advice was, use your prefrontal cortex. Engage the rational brain. Don't get totally swept away by jealousy or obsession, especially early on.
Knowledge is power, basically.
That's what was said. Knowing it's partly brain chemistry can help you step back a bit.
What about long-distance relationships? That seems like a challenge from this perspective.
A huge challenge, biologically. If oxytocin release relies on physical presence, eye contact, touch, well, distance makes that tough.
So the advice was?
Prioritize visits. Make in-person time a top priority. It's crucial for maintaining that bond neurochemically.
Okay, makes sense. Beyond the brain chemicals, though, the conversation also mentioned basics, right?
Absolutely. Grounded stuff. Kindness, taking out the trash, fidelity, the fundamental building blocks. Without those, the fancy neurochemistry doesn't mean much long-term.
True. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Anxiety and fear came up next. How were they defined?
Anxiety was defined really helpfully, I thought, as unfocused fear. It's that dread without a clear target.
And there was a practical exercise for managing it.
Yes, a clear 4-step process. Step 1, identify specifically what you're worried about. Pin it down.
Okay, step 2.
Define the absolute worst-case scenario. What's the catastrophic outcome you're imagining?
Got it. Then step 3.
Realistically assess the probability. How likely is that worst-case scenario, really? Be honest.
And finally, step 4.
Plan what you do if it did happen. Have a concrete plan.
Okay, so it channels the anxiety, it gives the fear a direction, and engages a rational brain, the prefrontal cortex again.
Exactly. It turns fuzzy anxiety into manageable, specific fear you can actually address.
That sounds really useful. And things like journaling help too.
Yeah, metacognition, thinking about your thinking and journaling were highlighted. Simple tools, but powerful for getting those strong emotions out of the sort of primal areas and into the prefrontal cortex where you can process them better.
Makes sense. What about jealousy? That came up again, but from an evolutionary angle.
Right, exploring the different triggers often seen in men and women. For men, the evolutionary perspective links jealousy often more strongly to concerns about sexual infidelity, paternity uncertainty, basically.
And for women?
Often more triggered by a partner forming a deep emotional connection with another woman. This links back to ancestral concerns about losing resources, support, and protection for offspring.
And there was some interesting, maybe slightly controversial advice about apologies based on this.
Yes, presented purely as an observation of sensitivities, not as relationship advice or an excuse for bad behavior, importantly.
Okay, caveat noted.
The idea was, if seeking forgiveness, a man might find emphasizing the lack of love or emotional connection with the other person more effective with his female partner, whereas a woman might find emphasizing the lack of physical intimacy or sexual satisfaction in the affair resonates more with her male partner's sensitivities.
But again, the main point was fidelity is key.
Absolutely. That was strongly reinforced. This was just exploring potential differences in what hurts most, evolutionarily speaking.
Got it. Then there was this adoration-admiration thing.
Yeah, another dynamic often seen in heterosexual relationships. The tendency, not a hard rule, but a tendency for women to perhaps value feeling adored, cherished, protected, and for men to value feeling admired, respected for competence, achievements.
So different core needs being potentially emphasized.
Potentially. Understanding that dynamic might help meet each other's needs better. The practical advice for men was pretty direct.
Yeah.
Adore your partner and be admirable.
Adore and be admirable. Sounds like a plan. What about perception biases? How we see attraction?
Ah, yes. Men tend to overperceive attraction from women. Women tend to underperceive it from men.
Which explains a lot of awkward interactions, probably.
Could do. And related to attraction in context, the workplace plus two phenomenon?
Meaning colleagues seem more attractive.
Exactly. Just proximity, shared experience. It can increase perceived attractiveness. This was mentioned as a factor in workplace affairs, suggesting maybe employers should think about social events that include partners to kind of integrate those worlds.
Interesting workplace implication. Now, the conversation also went into pornography. Concerns were raised there.
Yeah, pretty significant concerns about its potential addictiveness, first off, and then about its impact on relationships, potentially skewing expectations, especially for men, objectifying women.
And potentially interfering with that natural love cascade we talked about.
Exactly. The risk mentioned was young men maybe getting stuck in that initial attraction phase, driven by visual stimuli, and finding it harder to progress to deeper connection and bonding.
That ties into another point about role models, specifically fathers.
A very striking point. It was stated that the #1 predictor of a man's success is having witnessed his father loving his mother well. And loving well was defined specifically as staying home, being present, and being faithful.
Wow. That's a powerful statement about the impact of seeing a healthy relationship.
Immense impact. Which leads to the next point.
Right.
What if you didn't see that?
Right, for people from non-intact homes.
The message was empowering. You could be a circuit breaker. You can use self-awareness, those metacognitive skills we talked about, to manage emotions, make conscious choices, and build healthier patterns than the ones you grew up with. It's not deterministic.
That's a hopeful message. Okay, towards the end, there was a framework for wisdom. 4 stages.
Yeah, a neat model. Stage 1, philosophy, ancient wisdom asks the big questions. Stage 2, biology understands the mechanisms. Stage 3, behavioral science gives you the data, the evidence. And stage 4, management science focuses on practical application, how to actually do things.
And the key is using all 4.
Right. Skipping stages leads to an incomplete picture. But the most crucial step is moving from just learning to doing, applying it, experimenting in your own life. Live like you're a lab was the phrase used.
I like that. And teaching helps too.
Yes, teaching others was mentioned as a great way to really solidify your own understanding.
Okay, nearly there.
Yeah.
Contempt in relationships came up as a big danger sign.
Huge. Called a major marriage killer, based on Gottman's research. Contempt, that mix of anger and disgust, often shown by eye-rolling. It's incredibly corrosive.
And linked to motive attribution asymmetry. What's that again?
That's our tendency to assume our bad behavior is due to circumstances. I snapped because I'm stressed.
Mm.
But their bad behavior is due to their character. They snapped because they're a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
We assume bad motives in others, good intentions in ourselves.
I love, they hate, that kind of thing.
Exactly. The solution. Consciously avoid contempt. Assume good intentions, or at least neutral ones, and communicate clearly about your own feelings and needs, focusing on the underlying love.
And beyond contempt, just bad habits that create distance.
Yeah, anything that consistently pulls partners apart, creates insufficient connection, like prioritizing work way above the relationship, neglecting that emotional nurturing. That stuff chips away at the bond, too.
Okay. The conversation also touched on how our brains change over our careers. Fluid versus crystallized intelligence.
Right. Fluid intelligence problem solving, innovation tends to peak younger. Crystallized intelligence, wisdom, pattern recognition, teaching tends to grow with age and experience.
So the idea is to adapt your role as you age.
Exactly. Lean into your strengths as they shift. Maybe move from pure innovation to mentorship, strategy, teaching. It highlighted the value of having older, experienced people in leadership. They bring that crystallized intelligence.
And personality changes, too, generally for the better.
Generally, yeah. Research suggests neuroticism tends to go down, agreeableness and conscientiousness tend to go up.
Yeah.
We often become, a bit more stable and maybe easier to be around as we get older.
Something to look forward to. Okay, last major point. This idea of a death fear.
Yeah, a deep one. The ultimate threat to your self-concept, your ego. For some, it's failure. For others, irrelevance, humiliation. It varies.
And the way to deal with it, this Moreno Sadi.
Theravada Buddhist death meditation. The idea isn't to be morbid, but to make death, or your deepest fear, familiar, ordinary. Rob it of its paralyzing power by contemplating it regularly.
How do you figure out your own death fear?
The suggestion was practical. Look at your paranoid fantasies. What are the catastrophic scenarios your mind jumps to? That probably points to your core fear.
Yeah.
Then the exercise is to write your own Moreno Sadi, confront that fear directly, make it familiar.
And the benefit of doing that?
Greater freedom, authenticity. If you're not constantly subconsciously running from that core fear, you're less likely to try and earn love or approval in unhealthy ways. You can just be.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to take in.
It really is. As you can hear, these sources offered this incredibly rich picture of, us. Human behavior, love, fear, growth. From brain chemicals right up to societal forces.
We covered so much: the neurochemistry, relationship dynamics, managing anxiety, evolutionary quirks, even confronting our deepest fears.
So for everyone listening, maybe think about those stages of falling in love. Do you see them playing out anywhere? They're that four-step anxiety plan. Could that actually work for you?
And that concept of the death fear, it's provocative, isn't it? What really keeps you up at night, and what if facing it actually sets you free?
Exactly. Hopefully this deep dive has given you some, surprising facts, maybe some memorable stories, but most importantly, some concrete things to think about and maybe even try out.
Relationships, personal growth, they're complex, no doubt, but understanding some of the science behind it all can be really empowering, right? Gives you more awareness, more intention.
Absolutely. So what stuck with you the most? What questions popped up? We really hope this encourages you to keep exploring, maybe look into David Buss's work or mindfulness techniques.
It's definitely an ongoing journey, learning and applying this stuff. Hopefully this chat has been a useful shortcut, sparked a few aha moments, and helped you feel a bit more well-informed on your path.